joined us for this evening here at my university. You'll notice tonight people around you just come, we've been working all day, so I'm going to bring some fresh energy to the conversation. My name is Pete Ritchie, I'm Director of Nourish Scotland, and we're delighted tonight to have a debate titled How Do We Tackle Food Poverty in a Wealthy, Food Exporting Nation? That's Scotland. And to chair the event tonight, we've got someone, and there's few people in Scotland actually for whom you can genuinely say they need no introduction. But if there are people in this room who haven't heard of Lesley Riddoch, don't put your hand up because I don't believe you. So, Lesley's one of our best known broadcasters and authors and journalists and campaigners, and has been a huge progressive force in Scotland over the last few years. And I think lots of social movements in Scotland have had Lesley's influence somewhere in them. Recently she's championed Nordic social policy in Scotland and has been instrumental in getting closer links between the Scottish Government and some of our colleagues over the seas, which has got to be all for the good. So I'll just hand over to Lesley without any further ado. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. What a belter weather-wise, isn't it? How unexpected. But then that's nature for you, isn't it? Always doing unexpected things that you're not ready for. Well, today's subject, I mean, you could take this in a whole number of levels, and our speakers, I guess, will choose which way they want to attack it. But, food poverty in a rich society, quite obviously, what we've seen recently has drawn our attention to the appalling nature of food banks and the fact that people in what is should be the fourth richest society on earth are unable to afford food. I was contacted actually by a woman from Dundee who had actually just completely run out and gone through a whole series of problems with benefits, one move, one separation from a partner, and that was enough to basically throw all of her DSS records into turmoil. She'd worked most of her life actually, but she'd just run out of energy, patience, everything. So we went round a supermarket. It was quite an embarrassing experience in a way. I stood at the door and said, look, just go for what you want, because can you imagine walking around with somebody that's going to pay for it at the end, So I did go a wee bit of a way with her, and I was actually very humbled because she bought raw vegetables, she bought the best, she bought good food. She actually knew what was nutritious. She wasn't going straight for the comfort pizza. She wasn't going for what you might have expected folk to go for if they'd actually had a really tough time, which she had. And in a way it made the predicament all the more appalling because she knew what she needed and she shot very modestly. I think the only luxury they had was pineapple juice. And it was one of the most humbling things I've done for a very long time. So this is a ludicrous set of affairs that we're in. A slightly more ludicrous one is that many of us don't know what is nutritious. And I would count myself in that. I've recently had some health problems that have made me look very closely at my diet. Of all people, I probably should have known better in that I set up a group, as was mentioned, called Nordic Horizons, which brings a lot of specialists over from Nordic countries to speak here. And I'm doing a PhD in Norway, which is comparing the cabin traditions, I have to say this very carefully, the cabin traditions of Norway and Scotland, which basically means huts. Now, if you say huts in Scotland, a lot of people, not you because you're the cognoscenti, but a lot of people go sheds and sort of conjecture that you're basically looking at wee shell-pit bits of wood in the corner. In any other country at our latitude, and in New Zealand, I mean, any of you that were watching the Top of the Lake series on television would see that, lots of people and lots of lives revolve around escape to somewhere where you can be in touch with nature, where you can grow things. We seem to be pretty well the only society at our latitude that doesn't do that. Land, the huge difficulty of getting hold of bits of land is obviously one key factor, but I wonder how much we'd ever thought through what that means. Anyway, in the course of this, I was in Oslo for 3 months, during which it was a to say it was an eye-opener was putting it mildly. I can remember going into this university department, opening one of the cupboards, which was for sort of joint stashes of food, and all there was in it was 46 different packets of crisp bread. I mean, two thoughts occurred to me. You ever thought of bulk buying? But the other one was, where's the food? You know, but actually this is it's a completely different way of life. People get up in the morning, 6 o'clock, they prepare their matpakke, which is their little, Tupperware boxy of stuff like we all used to do when we were wee. They take that into work. Everybody sits together for an hour in a very nice room that the work usually provides. They'll put tea and coffee on, or orange juice, or whatever liquid-wise, but, you're expected to bring your lunch with you. There are next to no takeaways. There is next to no fallback. I know you're going, what the? I'll tell you, I had a few what the moments myself when I just thought, it's fine, I'll just pick something up when I get there. No. And then if you do anything like try to have a wee Mars bar stash, no. I mean, you can quickly identify yourself as a complete social dropout by having fast food. The only quicker way to look completely pathetic is to ask for car directions to someone's house. So this is a different society, that works. It works. And so the expectation is entirely from childhood to much later in life that you would only an utter sucker would be buying pre-prepared food. Because it costs more, you don't know what's gone into it, and why would you? So, 3 months of that, I came back here. First stop was Stirling, and I tell you, I nearly wept. I looked at us, me included, we are not healthy people. And I think the difficulty is because we are not in a healthy herd. It's easy to kind of fit in with a herd. I did it for 3 months there. I wouldn't say I was nearly Norwegian at all, but I was not doing badly. People came up to me in the street and sometimes they spoke to me in Norwegian. But it's easy when you've got a herd that's taking you there. It's easy when expectations take you in a certain direction. It's easy when everyone you know is going off to a hut at the weekend and you just have to fall in. It's actually quite easy when all these things are normal. And then you have to ask yourself, what is it like when it's not normal? What is it like when it would be marking you out as a weirdo to eat lettuce out of a box? Because I suspect that's where we are. So there's a whole lot of an undertow, I think, with this question of malnourishment. Because actually, many of us are malnourished, sometimes overweight and malnourished. What a pickle we've got ourselves in. Just as well we've got two big old brains here to tackle the issue. Robin would never dismiss being called a big old brain, but today he's feeling a wee bit off-piste because of the many things he can wax lyrical about. Food is probably only the 43rd expert subject he has underneath his wing. If you saw him last night on News, was it Newsnight actually? Yeah. You'll have seen his day job is talking about the Common Weal project, which is an attempt to conceive of a whole, if you like, the people's home, which is the folkhemmet, which was the idea set up in the Nordic countries, so something that works completely as a future for Scotland. That's part of the Jimmy Reid Foundation. That's their main project at the moment. And Robin is director of aforementioned foundation and also editor of the Scottish Left Review. However, he'll be speaking after Rochelle. Rochelle Erica Faroul is the Fresh Food for All programme coordinator from Just Food in New York. Just to tell you a wee bit, she says she hails from Brooklyn by way of Barbados. I would have thought that means you're from Barbados myself, but there we go. She's a graduate of the Northwestern University. She has a degree in communication studies. She worked as a Peace Corps volunteer in Cape Verde in West Africa. And she joined a local food cooperative, Green Hill Food Cooperative, as a produce buyer. She worked there to meet the co-op standards of quality and sustainability, and there she worked directly with local farmers, farm cooperatives, and the like. So she describes herself as an avid eater, which is always a good way to describe yourself, and a farmer's advocate, which sometimes in Scotland is an unusual and mixed thing to try and achieve. So she's going to share her ideas about this question of food poverty in a rich nation. Would you please welcome our first speaker, Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm very excited to be here. While Claire is setting up, I just wanted to thank Pete Ritchie, Claire, Graham, wherever he is, Barbara, the Nourish Scotland board for having me here. In the short time that I've been here, I have learned an incredible amount, and I can only hope that I will be able to give as much as I've gotten from all of you on this trip. Thanks so much. Big thanks as well to all of the presenters this morning. You all provided a really thorough overview of the global food system, which makes my life a lot easier. And as a farmer's advocate, Joe Hunt, I adore you. You're a dreamboat. I mean, all of the farmers that we work with at Just Food are exactly like you, folks who are just incredible stewards of the land. I adore you and your work. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And before I begin, I will also mention that the irony of an American, a representative of the country that is most responsible for all of the food crimes committed worldwide, standing up here to talk about how best to tackle this issue is not lost on me. But let's carry on. So, where do I point this? No. Is this one?
No, it's not.
Ho-ho. Got it.
Try the other button.
Why not?
You use the keyboard.
Oh, cool. That I can do. Cool. So, just a brief history of who we are. So, Just Food was founded in 1995, at a time when, believe it or not, the food system didn't look very different. It, of course, has gotten a lot worse. We were faced with the task of changing the food system, and we, of course, needed to start really small, so we decided to start with a CSA program, which I'll get into much later on. And at that time, we were providing fresh fruits and vegetables from 2 farmers to 2 neighborhoods in New York City. We now have, I believe, 9 programs, including CSA, which has grown to 110 CSA networks throughout the city that are supported by 45 farmers. And we are about a lot more than just food access, right? Food security is so much more. Food justice is so much more of what we do. If you could go back. Thank you. When Just Food started in 1995, I, of course, was not around. I was 10. But I have a great relationship. We all have a great relationship with our board members. And when I was asking them what message I should share with all of you, they told me that I should present you all with a challenge, because Scotland, 5 million people live here, if that many. In New York City, we have more than twice the number of people, and at least one person from every country of the world lives in New York. That is certainly not the case here in Scotland, but you all have a really rich immigrant culture, which I have had the pleasure of experiencing here. And the challenge from Mary Nessel, Joan, Jackie, and everyone else is that you rely on that to build your food system, to strengthen it, to restore it, because the immigrants who come to Scotland have a really rich history of farming, of cooking, of eating, like all of you, and their contributions can only serve you well. Yeah. So, I thought it'd be best to chat a bit about our advocacy and policy work, even though it is a very small part of what we do. It is the engine that really drives every single one of our programs. So right now, for those of you who don't know, in America, not just in New York City, but in America, for the first time in a really long time, we don't have a farm bill, right? And our farm bill, when people think about what the farm bill is, I think they think most about farms, but it actually is really comprehensive. And the impact of the farm bill on not only sustainable agriculture, but urban agriculture is incredibly profound. Community food projects, nutrition education programs, SNAP, which are our food stamps programs, and other grassroots programs are all affected. And right now, funding for those is $0. The Beginning Farmer and Rancher program, which is a portion of our farm bill, which is funded by the USDA, was one of the programs that was left out of the farm bill. And that is really significant because in America, the average age of farmers is 58 years old, right? Now, I love my elder statesmen and women, but when we are faced with the task of continuing to feed 350 million people, when farmers are not only being aged out, but pushed out of farming because of commodity crops, because of trade, because of prices, we are really focusing right now on making sure that our young, socially disadvantaged farmers have a means of buying land. So we have that in common, right? Yeah, go ahead. So the pink elephant in the room, race and prejudice, is, again, a huge part of our social justice work. And I think one of the lasting legacies of Ronald Reagan's presidency, his 2 terms as president, in addition to his political marriage to Margaret Thatcher, is this image that he created of the welfare queen, right? What does the welfare queen look like? Looks like somebody who isn't educated, has a lot of kids, is just living off the state, doesn't really want to improve their livelihood, and they're the ones who are going to food pantries and getting lots of food. And for that reason, that is one of the reasons, but I think that is probably the main reason why the emergency food relief world looks the way it does, not just here in Scotland, but in the US. People are ashamed, even when they have absolutely nothing, they're absolutely ashamed to go to a food pantry, to go to a food bank to get food. And then, of course, there are these edible food-like substances, right, that we call food, which are created and supported by Big Ag. We call them Big Ag, Monsanto, Dole, all of those companies and corporations that have a really strong lobby in Congress. And unfortunately, their riders, their amendments get in more than ours, and that weakens our stance, our grassroots stance. Lobbyists are more likely to support commodity crops, GMOs, and unfair practices, all things that work against our interests. So, those are some of the problems. What are some of the other problems? Yeah. Lack of access to fresh produce, and not just lack of access, but affordability, right? Good food worldwide, good healthy food is prohibitively expensive, prohibitively expensive. Nutrition deficiencies, and not just nutrition, but dignity. As I mentioned earlier, we are really doing our best to restore justice and dignity to the food system. And there are long-term consequences of this, personal, familial. Children who go to school hungry stay hungry and therefore don't learn. Yeah. And of course, a basic knowledge about food. Knowing how your food is grown, knowing where it comes from, knowing that fresh food doesn't come from Walmart, that it comes from a farm, and knowing the farmer is a huge part of what we do as well. Yeah. So, how can emergency food programs increase access to nutritious produce? Yeah. Fresh Food for All. So that is the name of the program that I manage at Just Food. It's the one that I can speak most clearly and coherently about. The Fresh Food for All program has 2 goals. The first is to ensure that low-income, at-risk individuals living in New York City have access to high-quality, nutritious food. And our second goal is to support small family farms. And I want to be clear that our second goal is by no means secondary to the first. Yeah. Why Fresh Food for All? The program was started in 2002. This is what New York City looked like. And I did not add a current slide because, to be honest, the numbers haven't changed that much. So as someone said earlier, I guess our work is, what is it? Lipstick on the pig? Yeah? That's funny. I like that. Yeah. Cool. So each week, the 9 farmers that we work with supply vegetables to 48 food pantries. We call them food pantries, call them food banks, in and around New York City. And when the program started, we had 2 farmers sourcing vegetables to 2 food pantries. And the farmers were sending like 7 or 8 vegetables each week. And we realized that that was incredibly difficult for us, not necessarily logistically, but it was difficult for us to educate people about what they were getting, not just the food pantry clients, but the staff and volunteers as well. And so these days, and these are actual pictures of the vegetables that we send, these were taken recently, the farmers send 3 vegetables, a seasonal, a root, and a green. And it makes everyone's life a whole lot easier. As I'm sure all of you know, tracking the impact of your work and having quantifiable data to support all of your efforts is really important. So it makes it easy for us. And it makes it easy for the food pantry staff and volunteers because so much of what is sent each week is really unfamiliar, right? It's weird. Parsnips, folks have never heard of. Kohlrabi is another weird one. Celery root, totally foreign. So if food banks are only getting 3 vegetables, it's much easier for them to implement the nutrition education programming that they're expected to implement. And I should also mention that participation in the program is free for the food bank. They don't pay any money, but they do have to donate a significant amount of time in terms of training, recruiting volunteers for the programs, and of course, motivating their clients to try fresh fruits and vegetables. But the farmers are paid to participate. So we are essentially paying farmers to grow vegetables that they would have grown anyway, but would have been thrown onto the compost pile, or worse yet, gone to a landfill. Yep. So our partners in this program are the United Way of New York City. The United Way has always had a very strong relationship with food pantries. They are a multi-service agency. And our other partner is the New York State Department of Health. They're our primary funder. So they lend quite a bit of efficacy and, I guess, respectability to our work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. So these are the educational components that I mentioned earlier. Again, food pantries don't pay to be a part of the program, but the staff and volunteers do have to recruit volunteers who are trained to give cooking demonstrations each week at the food pantries during distribution. So folks are lined up, and at some pantries it's just 50 people, at others it's 250 people. And while they're waiting in line, there's a community chef or veggie educator who's there basically acting as a spokesperson, right? A cheerleader for fresh food. In addition, we provide recipes. We have I wasn't able to bring one because they're like 20 pounds. But we have a recipe binder that we provide to each food bank, and they use those to educate folks about what they're getting. And then, of course, we have our farm trips. No, you can go ahead. We have our farm trips and our Meet Your Farmer events, and those are really great opportunities for the farmers and their eaters to interact, and those happen each month. Farmers come into the city, they bring pictures, and of course, once or twice a year, we take folks out to meet their farmer and hang out with them for a day, and that's always a lot of fun. It's exhausting, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah. So one of the other programs that we have at Just Food, and I'll just cover this one briefly, is our City Farms Markets program. City Farms Markets are, we have 24 of them spread out across New York City, and they are unique in that, unlike our green markets, which are the traditional farmers markets that are funded by private donors, the City Farms Markets are run for and by community members, all of whom live in low-income, at-risk communities. They took the initiative and decided that they wanted to do something to better their communities. And so we have 24 throughout the city. They raise money on their own. They establish connections with farmers. A lot of the food that is sold at City Farms Markets is actually grown in New York City, which is great. So we have the urban agriculture component that is brought in as well. Yep. And the network is managed by Just Food. So any resources that they need throughout a season, we will provide, but for the most part, they run themselves. Yeah. And then here on the bottom, I have been chatting a lot with folks about the farmers market culture here in Scotland, which I guess is not as strong as it could be. And someone asked me about any unique programming that we have that encourages folks to get their staples at a farmer's market instead of going to the grocery store. And one of those is a new initiative called Health Bucks. So this is what a Health Bucks coupon looks like. And they're here on the bottom right. It's a 40% increase in a person's purchasing power. So for every $5 that you spend at the farmer's market, you'll get a $2 health buck that you can spend on anything else at the farmer's market. And in the past 2 years, participation at farmers markets has gone up 120%. So they're actually working. In addition to Health Bucks, someone mentioned earlier our FVRX program, Fruit and Vegetable Prescriptions Program. That is brand new. It's only a few weeks old. And that is a program where folks who are suffering from any food illnesses, including diabetes, juvenile diabetes, can go and see their doctor. And their doctor, instead of writing them a prescription for a medication that no one can pronounce, will write them a prescription for fruits and vegetables. And they will get health bucks that they can then spend at the farmer's market. And that is working as well. It's really fun participating in that. Just some photos to show you of some of the farmers markets in New York City. This is a billboard of one, the Hattie Carthen Community Market. Yep. Another here, so these are some of the, unfortunately I took these at the end of the day, which I should not have done. But yeah, we have Swiss chard and some more photos of our health bucks in use. Cool. So our City Farms program is probably the most dynamic of all of the programs that Just Food offers, and the one program that we rely on the most to essentially, I guess, promote the other work that we do. As I mentioned earlier, New York has a really rich history of folks moving there in search of the American dream, blah, 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 right? And they moved to the city with a really rich history of farming. And we have been able to put that to use by setting up urban farms in New York City. Some folks decide that they only want to grow fruit. Great. Some folks decide that they just want chickens. And because chickens are now legal in New York City, we have a number of chicken coops that have popped up that are Just Food sponsored. And I think it was last year, bees were legalized in New York City, which I'm not even going to deal with, but folks seem to really love them. In any event, they encourage people, again, to be good stewards of the land, know where their food comes from, know how it's grown, and grow it in their own backyard. For many New Yorkers, leaving the city is not an opportunity that they have available to them, and so if they can only just grow fruits and vegetables on a window farm, hydroponically, I think that we've done good. Okay. So this is one farm. It's called Brooklyn Rescue Mission. It's grown on an abandoned lot in New York City. And you can see some high tunnels here. They have their compost worm bin up there that was converted out of an old oil drum. Reverend Devaney Jackson is one of the pioneers of urban agriculture, not just in New York City, but nationwide. She helped spearhead the urban agriculture movement in Detroit and is still doing great work. Yep. And that's her husband, Reverend Robert Jackson. Yep. And these are their chickens. They have 32 ladies. They call them ladies. And in 3 years, they haven't lost one, and they're very proud of that. Yeah. And this is their abandoned lot. It's about a half-acre plot of land. The home that was there was torn down. It had been abandoned for many years, and no one expressed an interest in using that land. So they petitioned the city to have the home torn down, and this is what they've done with it. And it's a sight to behold, quite frankly. Yeah. So for those who don't have access to land, it's possible to grow food indoors. And that's something that is happening quite a bit now as well, with hydroponic farms popping up throughout the city. So this is a hydroponic farm that was started in another neighborhood of Brooklyn, thanks to Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And by the time I get back, we will have a new mayor. I'm not sure how strong their food policies will be, but Mayor Michael Bloomberg, for all of his faults, has done an incredible amount to restore justice to the food system in New York City. And I just have a couple other photos to show. These are school children who, during their second lunch period, go over to CDSC to water the gardens, and all of the vegetables that are grown in the hydroponic farm go back to their school. So it's a great sustainable system. Cool. So farm school, I heard someone mention earlier a gastronomy program that is on the up and up here, and Farm School NYC is somewhat similar. Farm School was a collective vision of many organizations in New York City. Jane Hodge, who is Welsh, on her next visit home, I think y'all should really chat with Jane. She's amazing. When she was managing the city farms markets, she was working with urban farmers and got feedback that trainers and farmers wanted more professional development opportunities. So the Beginning Farmer and Rancher program of the USDA in September of 2010 gave Just Food $400,000 for 3 years to start a farm school in NYC. And this was an incredible accomplishment for us for a few reasons. The grant was generous, right? And getting this particular grant was recognition from the federal government that urban farming is relevant, and also that urban communities produce rural farmers, right? That is probably the most successful piece of this. So we launched classes in January of 2011. We just graduated our first class last year, and they've gone on to do many things. Some, when they joined farm school, already knew what they wanted to do, right? They wanted to start a successful value-added business, and farm school gave them the tools and the resources to do that. Others wanted to start urban farms, others wanted to start rural farms, and they are now sourcing their produce to New York communities in New York City, which is great. And regardless of what they're doing, each and every single student fulfills the mission of farm school, which is to benefit communities in New York City. And the structure of farm school, if you can go to the next slide, it's a 2-year certificate program in urban agriculture. And so during the first year, the school year starts with a training of trainers. Training of trainers is probably the engine that drives all of our work. It has a very strong food justice focus because we want our students, not only our students, but our teachers to have the right foundation. And then training of trainers is followed up by a food justice course. The rest of the first year provides technical growing skills, and during the second year, students have a focus, whether it's botany, animal husbandry, urban agriculture. Yeah. So that's farm school. Our CSA program, I'm trying to rush here, I know I don't have much time. Our CSA program, again, CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And in New York City, it's actually a product of Japan, but we do it really well in New York. CSA started in 1996 in Japan, and in New York, our first was in the winter of '96. We now have developed all of our CSAs to provide a flex payment sliding scale option, and that started in 1999. That was the first farmer to do that was Cheryl Rogowski, and Cheryl holds the distinction of being the only farmer who's won the MacArthur Genius Award, and she is a genius. Yep. So, who knows what a CSA is? Cool. I love it. So, it is a mutually beneficial relationship for not only the farmer and the CSA community member, right? And it completely cuts out the middleman. It's perfect. Right, Joe? Yeah. No, it's great. So, we have a farmer who provides fresh produce to the members who are all part of a community, who know their farmer, and therefore are invested in that farmer's livelihood. And not just the farmer, but the farmer's family, farmer's workers, etc. Yep. And farmers deliver what we call shares, and the use of that word was very strategic in the beginning because we want members to understand that they are making an investment in a farm. So shareholders pay upfront. Depending on your level of income, you pay a few $100s upfront to have vegetables delivered to you each week over the course of a season. And we do our best to make sure that CSA members understand why they're paying upfront, because the farmer can use those funds that they get in February or March, long before they've planted the first seeds for the season, to invest in their business, to grow, install infrastructure, buy more equipment, hire new workers, etc. So what does a share look like? A share is 7 to 12 items every week for anywhere between 20 and 24 weeks. The produce is similar. I should not have worded it in this way because that actually isn't true. The produce is, folks are getting vegetables, but they actually don't look anything like what you get in the grocery store. Oftentimes, farmers are sending really rare heirloom varieties that are beautiful that you can't really get in a grocery store, and that's one of the beauties of CSA as well, is that farmers have the freedom to grow vegetables that consumers typically wouldn't eat. And with that said, I will say that in as much as last night I attended with Pete a talk on GMOs, and I heard a lot of folks blaming the farmers for using certain seeds, using certain foods to feed their animals. And I have a really hard time as a farmer's advocate swallowing that, because ultimately we eaters and consumers are as much to blame for the food system as the farmer is, as the corporation is, because farmers won't grow, they won't grow what we won't eat. And at least in America, we want a tomato that looks perfect. We want a potato that doesn't have any black eyes on it. We want a head of lettuce that is not covered in dirt, right? And it's one of the reasons why there are so few varieties of vegetables left in the world today. And of course, seasonality. This is probably the toughest sell of CSAs in New York City, is having folks understand that you are not going to get a tomato in May. Deal with it. Because they don't grow then. Not in New York State. You'll get them in August, and until August, you're going to eat what is grown in May. Lettuce, lots of light greens, and that's that. So, and it's just as much as nutrition education programming is important to the work that I do in the Fresh Food for All program, it's also really important to the work that Paula Lukatz does in the CSA program. And Paula works with folks who make a lot of money, are educated, and still don't know much about seasonality. So regardless of your level of income, folks still don't have a very strong connection to the food system. And then we offer half shares and full shares. And I think that's self-explanatory. Yeah. So, of course, CSAs are impactful for farmers for a few reasons. You're supporting small, local family farms, and our definition of local has changed over the years to include farmers who do not live in New York State. We now define local as any farm within a 250-mile radius of New York City, and we are now sourcing from New Jersey, Massachusetts, Vermont, and even DC, believe it or not.
Michelle, sorry to interrupt
Yeah,
you.
sure. Go ahead. Yeah. Cool. Got it. Cool. Yes. Awesome. I hit it all. Cool. And of course, it's impactful for city residents for obvious reasons. Who knows what these are? Yes. Cool. Uh-huh. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much. I tend to rant, which is not good.
And I tend to rant as well, but not tonight. I'll be very, very brief and very concise. No, I've got no presentation, so no need help. I am so glad to hear about the emancipation of New York's chickens. I didn't realise they were so persecuted prior to the point at which they were made legal citizens. So that's a delightful piece of information to hear tonight. Okay, yes, this is one of a number of subjects which we are looking at. We're looking at food security in the Jimmy Reed Foundation, the Commonweal Project, and it was very interesting to come in after lunch and hear all the discussion. Because what came across in all the things that you were talking about, the economics of small, the issues of how you deal with political and social attitudes to different kind of ways of doing things, of alternatives, this applies so closely to almost everything that we're doing. We're looking at energy policy, we're looking at education policy, we're looking at tax policy. And again, you find the same thing. There's an assumption that bigger is going to be more efficient, more effective. There is an assumption that if you start to disaggregate things, they're going to be hard to control, they're going to be hard to manage. And this is really a result of one specific aspect of the UK and the US's political attitudes of the last 30 years. We have developed an entire political culture based on the premise of the assumption of conflict. We have a conflict model for almost all policy making. It assumes that if you put two people into a room, whoever comes out alive is inherently better. The survivor, the person who's still standing at the end, has obviously got some sort of merit which got them through, and therefore those are the people that we should sort of aspire to be, or probably more likely get out of the way and let them run the show. This conflict model is involved in almost everything that we do. It is assumed, it is taken for granted as being the best way for social and economic development. But it's not. It's demonstrably, measurably not. If you look at the countries who have all the best indicators, of economic indicators, social indicators, they are often smaller, or they have high degrees of internal decentralization. They allow much closer decision making to where people live. They make completely different assumptions about what are good outcomes, and they ask different questions in the first place. Now, while I'm not a food policy expert, I am very keen on food personally. I love eating and stuff. I'm also quite a keen cook. We moved out to run the Jimmy Reed Foundation. We sold everything we have, built a little house out in the woods with chickens and raised beds and all the rest of it. There's not a lot of pain left in politics. So I do have a very strong personal interest in this, and I was interested to hear a lot of the things that people were talking about today. Let me give you a couple of examples of how conflict and a conflict approach really doesn't help us when it comes to the question of eating healthily and having food, and the disgrace, the disgusting situation that we are living in a rich country, and there's food poverty and fuel poverty and so many other kinds of poverty. It's absolutely unacceptable. So let's start at the very beginning. School is a conflict system in this country. We are hopefully going to get a paper out soon, and if I was going to summarise it, that paper could be summarised by saying, abolish the Department of Child Assessment and establish a Department of Education. Because we've created a conflict model in which parents say that what they need is for their children to get into university. And whatever the crazy mechanisms, whatever the crazy measure for that is, that's what they must be taught. So we teach children to beat each other for almost the entire school career. And since universities don't want children who have any great knowledge of food, particularly, it's not an entry requirement, that is just not something that conflict model will pick up. So conflict teaches children to not care about food. This is what happens with conflict. Let's think about conflict in planning, because this is another aspect which I don't think people think about enough. Public spaces, cities, are not accidental. They are designed, they are planned in a number of different ways, but we use a conflict model. So let me give you two examples of how a conflict model of developing a city is bad for your belly. First of all, we take an assumption that whoever is the strongest economic entity deserves to control the retail space. Therefore, we're about to see another expansion of Buchanan Galleries in Glasgow, for example. Now, stop and think for a second. The kind of conversations that probably went into that. We can get some more retailers in to oversaturate a market which is already oversaturated and appear to do something, appear to be making a difference. Great, great. Did anybody at any point put their hands up and say this conflict model might not be working because what is it that they're selling? It really favours low margin, low productivity enterprise. It favours big box retail. Is what it favours, because it's a conflict model. And I'll come back to what the alternative might look like, but we don't understand the extent to which designing city centres through conflict squeezes out the capacity for the sorts of enterprises which could make a difference in terms of how we eat. Let me think of another conflict model. I don't think, as citizens, we've quite understood the extent to which the primary farming that goes on in the UK just now is the farming of us. Not of cattle, not of any livestock. We have cities which are designed to farm us, to take stuff off us. We are simply a throughput which has a value for a notional economy in that city. So, if we talk, for example, about the George Square revamp in Glasgow, if you look at what it was that they said they were trying to do, it was about throughput, footfall, retail. Almost, if they'd said they were going to put magnets under George Square to suck loose change out of our pockets, it couldn't have been more blatant. And let's think about what that means come lunchtime. I worked in both Glasgow and Edinburgh for many years. We had a small kitchen in my office, except you couldn't cook in it because the smells went around the whole office and people weren't happy. You could maybe have microwaved something, maybe. But that was all that we could do. And so we had to go somewhere. We had to leave our office. And from the second we step outside that door, we are being farmed by Pret, by McDonald's, by Greggs. They are using a system of planning the space that we have to mean that if we want to eat at lunchtime in a city, we have to go and hand over money to a corporate. It's almost the only option. There are small sandwich shops, but even there you're paying very heavy odds for 2 bits of bread with something in the middle. And this is something that you might think you can do it differently, but I'll give you a challenge. I had an unusual gap between 2 meetings. It was actually last summer in Glasgow, and I brought my book with me. And I thought, you know something, I'm not going to squeeze another meeting. I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes and read. And I was a little thirsty. I thought, I just want to find somewhere comfortable to sit and get a glass of water. And so I set myself the task, and an hour later I was sitting in a bar with a beer. It was the only drink that I could get with a seat. We plan our cities to farm us. This is just something that we do. Let me give you another straightforward conflict model. A conflict model which says that the market is free and informed citizens, and I'm going to come back to informed in a second, informed citizens in the market is the highest ideal that we can have. And how are we informed? Advertising. Advertising is a pinnacle of a conflict model. It is the pinnacle of the farming of the human. You are stuck. It is almost impossible to escape advertising nowadays. This is another experiment that I did with people. Go today and see how hard it is for you to avoid being sold something, particularly something that you didn't want. And to be quite honest, it really involves not leaving the house, putting on the telly, reading a newspaper, picking up a magazine, or putting on the radio other than BBC radio. This conflict model drives us to do things that we don't really want to do. this advertising model. One of the very important things about advertising is we think we're clever as humans, and we are, but most of the time we're not. Most of the time we're responding to programming, and I'm fairly dogged in my determination not to be too much of a sheep, but quite often I come out of a meeting and I'm like, right, I'm starving, the car's up there, what can I do? And what pops into my head is logos. Where can I go? I don't like Subway or McDonald's. Oh God, no, not McDonald's, but I suppose it's quick and it's convenient. This is making us what we are. Now, let me reverse now. And what could the alternative be? What would something different look like if we were going to develop that model? What if we could develop a model of social and economic development in Scotland which was based on mutuality, based on the assumption that what we are seeking to do is answer complex questions, and they are complex questions, by trying to identify ways that we can get the most wins for the most people out of any course of action. So let's rewind. If we really want to have children who have, first of all, a chance to be children, and second of all, a chance to become citizens, then let's stop weighing them. Let's stop measuring them. Let's stop poking and prodding them. Let's let them play a bit. Let's let them learn a bit. Let's let them discover a bit. And let's give them a balanced sense of what it is to be a citizen. How can we do that? Just stop the exams. Literally stop the exams. In Finland, they don't have a single exam until the very, very last couple of weeks of school, when they do an assessment process for the universities. And the universities have got an important role in this as well. They are hell of a dogmatic about what constitutes entry criteria. We need to break this down. And if we did that, we could start to look at school as a citizen-creating entity. I think we can probably answer the question, has the free market fed us well? Quite straightforwardly. And we have to be clear that it hasn't. And one of the things which upsets me, I've got a number of teacher friends, and they all have toast clubs. And this sounds okay, but it's actually one of the most upsetting things. It really deeply bothers me. This is where teachers from their own pocket do toast and tea at morning break because quite a lot of their kids haven't been fed at home. And their concentration's not good enough. They're exhausted, they're tired, they didn't get fed on the way into school. I'm beginning to think perhaps what we should just simply do is shift the school day half an hour forward and get every kid getting breakfast at school in the morning, first thing, a non-market solution. So if we start to take a mutual approach to our education system, things change. Let's take a mutual approach to Buchanan Galleries. Let's divide it into lots and lots of little retail spaces where local traders would have a chance of a high-profile city centre position where they could sell. Modern technologies mean they wouldn't even need their own tills. You could wander around what would be, in effect, a large enclosed farmer's market, put stuff in your basket, and using RDIF, the little chip technology, on the way out, you would just be billed. We could do this quite easily if we asked different questions about what a city is for and about what the economic impact of the things that we do has. And this is something where I'm going to say, O Greens of the world, rise up and be more like your enemy, because the corporates are incredibly good at describing what they do in economic terms, and it's persuasive to the kind of people in city planning who like economic terms. And yet, if you point out that McDonald's absorbs all of your money and exports it rapidly out of the economy where it has no impact, and yet small local suppliers keep all of the money in the economy where you get a virtuous multiplier effect, maybe they would start to listen. We could plan our cities differently. My other, you'll gather that I'm not a fan of shopping malls, my other Glasgow project is clear out St Anne's Centre, fill it with tables and sitting areas, put in a couple of kettles and let people have their lunch out the rain in a place where they can sit in comfort without having to spend all their money on pre-made sandwiches. You can't, seriously, you can't even eat in most offices now unless you're actually sitting at your desk and then it's crumbs for the rest of the day. No wonder we are farmed and no wonder we waste our money in these different places. And advertising, we just need to crack way down in advertising. It is a major problem. We should never have allowed it to get to where we get to. This is not a food example, but I use it quite a bit, so I'll just use it anyway. And this is the last thing I'll say. What happened to the Frisbee? Where did the Frisbee go? The Frisbee was great fun. And yet nobody plays Frisbees anymore. And why? Because they cost £2 once and give years of fun. So nobody advertises them, and instead they advertise 10-pin bowling. And I know this to be the case because one Sunday we were trying to work out what me and a bunch of friends with a hangover were going to do, and it wasn't actually Frisbee, it was a kite on this occasion. And we'd looked over all the options, and someone said, you know something, let's get the kite, let's go out to the park. And it was great fun, and we did it. And it was way more fun and way more enjoyable than what we'd have done. So, advertising, a non-conflict version of advertising. How about for every minute of advertising, we have a half minute of anti-advertising. So each minute of advertising finishes with someone that comes on the telly and says, you know what, your house is fine and your car's okay. Your girlfriend isn't ugly and you don't smell. You don't have to spend money. Go and enjoy your life. Let's have a non-conflict way of running the country, and let's see what that does to our bellies.
Okay, well, let's have some rapid-fire questions from the perky audience then, or any observations that you want to make, particularly questions to Rochelle and Robin. Come on, don't be shy now. We've got one up there. Have we only got one microphone? Yeah. Right. Can I just test, because this could get very exhausting for you, Claire. How just speak loudly. That's pretty good.
Question for you.
Okay.
That's fine. Or form an orderly queue.
Right, hang on a second. So we have to wait for the microphone, do we?
Okay. I'm really glad I attend this debate. At first I wasn't quite sure a debate, what would that be? What strikes my mind is what exactly the meaning as food is to us. Because it's not just only feed us to get into the stomach. It actually can mean the social identity of a person, as well as the mental security. Because no food, yes, you know food, but there are a lot of people, they were talking about earlier, they don't go to food bank because of the stigma. And it's really strange because I just don't, I don't understand. It was actually mentioned several times about nutrition and food. Earlier, I came from a society about nutrition and food and nutrition. And during the day in the morning, I hesitate to mention the word nutrition because people talk about the poverty, people cannot afford food. If you cannot even afford food, how could you actually talk about nutrition? But maybe I was wrong, because if you know the importance of nutrition, you will actually value what exactly food you are getting, although you might not be able to afford it. But that must be a way to actually solve the problem. Earlier talking about education, I'm not sure how many people are aware of the education regarding to nutrition. I mean, for people in health sector, for example, doctors, they don't even have modules about nutrition. Maybe they've only got like one lesson in their whole training about nutrition. It's hardly anything. Even dietitian, what they were told is basically the standard. But when it gets to daily living, maybe what they were taught in the class is actually not really applicable to what is happening. Yeah,
right.
Sorry.
Thanks very much. It's just, you know, the problem. We've got very little time and a lot of people who need to put their hands back up so that Claire can find you again.
Hi, a question for Rochelle. I wanted to know
what your names are when you're at it.
My name's Eva Schonfeld. I wanted to know about your, dollars, your market dollars.
Health bucks.
Health bucks.
Yes, what would you like to know?
How are they funded?
Health bucks are funded by the Laurie M. Tisch Foundation. Tisch has buildings at many universities across the United States. They have a lot of money to blow. And they partially fund them, and then a majority of them are actually subsidized by New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And they are right now only available in New York City. They're not available elsewhere throughout the state, that comes with its own set of question marks. But yeah.
Okay, otherwise I'm not forgetting the first question. I'm just going to collect all the questions and then ask the two to pick which ones to answer. So far away.
Yeah, Tim Cowan from Woodlands Community Garden in Glasgow, and maybe a question for Robin. one of the things we're trying to do is set up alternative models for food bank, which are more like social centres, and look at learn mainly some of the lessons from what's happening in Greece. But if we actually look at one of the biggest causes of food poverty, it's not welfare reform, it's welfare cuts, and particularly the gross and Kafkaesque state of sanctions and the way that people are left without money and being penalised, which is all to do with actually reinforcing notions of stigma and benefit scroungers. So I'll be interested to know around the Commonwealth's work and in how can we link up these issues around local food with really tackling and looking at alternative systems for a compassionate rather than an inhumane welfare system.
Okay, I love the way these small questions are coming right at the end here. We're going to basically try and figure out how to mesh the local food system with the whole welfare system, but you're right. Yes?
Hi, Heather Anderson, farmer. I thought your thing about connecting farmers with people in the city was really important. I was just interested in how you recruited the farmers. Did they come to you or did you recruit them independently?
Sure. Should I answer that now?
Yeah.
So, all of our farmers are like Joe Hunt. They are. They're great. I mean, they're great people. And the farmers that we work with are all rural farmers, spread out throughout our tri-state area: New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont. And they approached us because they were most interested in not just selling more food, but accessing a specific population that they otherwise wouldn't have the means of selling to. A lot of our farmers sell to restaurants, hospitals, schools, grocery stores. We have a number of farmers who source food directly to Whole Foods and other expensive supermarkets in the city. Many of our farmers now have what we call workplace CSAs. So instead of selling CSA shares to community members, they'll sell CSA shares to folks at their place of work, making it easier for the CSA shareholder. But they don't always have a way of selling vegetables to folks from Ethiopia and Barbados, and that allows, being able to have that relationship with those folks allows them to diversify their market. They can grow vegetables that they otherwise wouldn't be able to, vegetables like popolo, which most New Yorkers don't want to eat. Most New Yorkers don't know what that is, right? And so it's a great way for them to, again, diversify.
Okay, thanks. Microphone's there.
Michelle, hi, it's Joe Hunt here.
Hi.
Farmer. I just wanted to say that your own programme looks pretty hot as well. And if you ever want to come and be an advocate for a farm in the north of Scotland, then you know where to start. Okay, so that's good. I also was interested by your healthy food prescription programme. There's a very small example of this running in the Highlands of Scotland for a couple of years, with 3 growers near Ullapool and a friendly GP local doctor who set up a prescription scheme for about 30 people. And it was also run in Merkinch, which is the nearest that Inverness gets to, an inner city. Again, where there was a doctor providing referrals to local organic growers to provide box schemes, basic access to box schemes, instead of putting people on long-term statins, essentially for high-risk people with coronary disease. And it was a very successful program. It worked on 2 levels. It worked for the farmer because they'd got a regular order, and the cost was £10 for the box, and the participant paid £2, and the health budget paid for £8 of it. And it worked for the consumer because they weren't on statins, and they got some education program around cooking and so on. It fell down after 2 years after an assessment by the National Health Service said that it was a fantastic program, but that the doctors concerned were not allowed to use their prescription budget to pay for the food, because the prescription budget is only for drugs, it's not for food. So I was wondering if you've managed to find a way around that on your side of the pond.
We haven't, and again, the program is only, I think, 4 weeks old, but that is a fear that many folks in the food and certainly nutrition communities have, because our current mayor, Michael Bloomberg, whose legacy is the public health mayor, is leaving office on September 10th, and we don't know what the fruit and vegetable prescription program will look like. The success of the program is certainly contingent upon us being able to prove that it works. And it's also, I think, a contractual issue because the farmers markets are set up directly outside of the hospital that they are serving, outside of Lincoln Hospital, outside of Mount Sinai Hospital, and for as long as those streets are privately owned by the board of that hospital, we can't guarantee that the farmers market will always be there.
Fiona Crawford, I've got a question probably for the three of you. I don't know if Lesley's allowed to respond, but it was as well just to ask whether school meals across New York are free for all pupils, and also if you could maybe say a bit more about what you think we might learn from a meal in a school that is about more than just the food and allows some of what Robin was talking about in relation to just sharing and communion and citizenship, rather than just about food.
That's a great question. School meals in public schools in New York are free for all students. And the New York City Department Department of Education is actually the second largest purchaser of food in America, second only to the U.S. Army. We buy a ton of food, and none of it is very good. In part because schools have been retrofitted to freeze food and then heat it up. And so two of the challenges that we have right now are, one, scheduling, making sure that students are eating at a time of day that adults would eat at, right? And the other challenge is transforming school kitchens and also transforming the mentality of teachers and cooks in schools to basically get them on board to slow down, right? The slow food movement is necessary. It's a huge part of all of our work, to slow down and prepare actual meals. Spend 3 hours a day cooking food. Don't spend 20 minutes cooking food. And to speak to the first point that I made, a perfect example of a scheduling problem is my brother. So my brother graduated from college, but when he was in high school, typically in New York City, your first period of your school day should be breakfast, right? His first period was lunch, and that was the case for many students. And if you woke up late and didn't get to school by 9:30, you didn't eat for the rest of the day. And school food was the main reason why parents sent their children to school in the first place, right? When the school food program started in America, it started because schools were having a hard time enrolling students, and parents would send their children to school knowing that that was the only free meal that their kid would get that day. And now it's not happening. So there are so many more problems involved in school food than just simply sourcing and cooking.
Robin?
I'm going to answer both of those questions together because I think what we need to think about here is markets. There are certain things which we automatically assume are not best delivered through a free market. War, largely. There's certain things that everybody accepts that is done on behalf of everybody. But what's happened is that zone has been shrinking and shrinking. So now we think electricity is a market thing and education becoming more of a market thing and so on and so on. And we need to fight back against this because markets can be good at allocating resources in the economic jargon, but only in places where it's not absolutely essential that it delivers, because markets fail, they always fail. And we take a number of areas where we accept this isn't the case, and what we're now doing is we're keeping privatised markets with high degrees of regulation and some elements to stop it collapsing, and the energy is the best example of that. We build our energy networks on the basis of bribing private companies to build it on our behalf, and we have various regulation to stop it being a catastrophe. We've got to come back to thinking quite clearly again that there are things which belong in the market and things which don't. Nutrition, as you're phrasing it up there, does not belong in the market. Now there are some foodstuffs that of course do. I'm not suggesting we nationalise chocolate, but the concept of how we address
nutrition is something we need to move out of a straightforward, well, the market will sort that for us and the corporations will sort that for us. And once you start to move ideas out of the free market, you start to imbue them with wider importance. And that's why the socialisation of food is something which is a problem. We know that the anti-socialisation of food, if I'm going to tell you one thing and then this will probably explain it. Has anyone ever paid attention to the music in Starbucks? They do something very specific, which is they change the tempo of the song between every song. Watch this and have a look at it. And that's because psychologists will tell you that changing time signatures on the background unsettles people and makes them move on. Starbucks designs their music to get you out of their shop as fast as they can. So they're anti-socialising food. If you take it out of the market, for example, by stripping St. Enoch's and letting us all hang out there, if you re-socialise the market, the market of food, you start to get a whole different set of relationships between people and the thing. And that's what we need to do. We need to start re-identifying things which are core social essentials. And we've got to say, we can't just keep our fingers crossed and hope that people will make all the right decisions if we let the corporations shove them around. And that's the core fundamental answer to it. Just like on the poverty question, the core fundamental answer is you can't cure poverty through food banks. We have a poverty economy. We have an entire set of macroeconomic and economic development strategies, all of which favour low productivity, low margin, high volume employment. And that creates poverty. Poverty is not a social problem. Poverty is an economic problem. You can't fix poverty socially, you have to fix it economically. So yes, we've got to do things now to mitigate the problems, but in the long term, you don't integrate food banks into local economies. You fix local economies and hopefully the need for emergency food banks goes. We cannot socialise our way out of poverty.
Just one little thought on this from the Nordic direction. Where was the question? You're there. Maybe not so much on the question of school lunches, but I visited several kindergarten in Norway which are co-located with farms.
Oh, that's cool.
Now, this is brilliant because in many, many ways it helps the immune system. It allows children to see absolutely everything that goes into making stuff. They actually take part in producing what the farm produces. There's pictures of them because you can still take pictures of children in Norway, which sadly here you can't. But there's pictures of them making hay. There's pictures of them selling tomatoes that they've grown to raise money for their kindergarten. And when I was interviewing this Norwegian farmer whose English was perfect, the only point where we had a difficulty was when I said, "Do you have any problems with health and safety?" And he just looked baffled. You need somebody to translate that. Now the trouble is here. Forgive me, but this is something I've been writing about in a book that just came out last week, which is why it's very much in my mind. We are a very done-to set of people. We're waiting for people to come up with solutions and give us lunches and give us this and give us whatever. There's a point at which we need to get back to involving people in as much as possible in lots of small ways. I must say, I don't relish the idea of having a stale sandwich and whatever, but I do relish the idea of lots of individual solutions in every single workplace, school place, college place, any place around the joint. Because from the societies I've seen that work, there is no silver bullet. There is no one big solution. And it just strikes me sometimes we look for a big solution to fight a big problem. And Scotland is obsessed with the notion of largeness. Even the solutions are large. I think we need to go cold turkey on large, if you'll pardon the terrible pun, and get ourselves to a stage where if there was enough local power, and that's the reason they made these connections, is because each municipality of perhaps just 4,000 to 6,000 people, a tax-raising municipality, which can control everything from education to health and roads, was able to make decisions to bring this about. And when you get that level of powerful localism, not David Cameron's style of localism, but the kind of one that makes you spring out of bed in the morning, you can begin to make sensible small connections. And that's what I see all over a lot of the Nordic countries, which I think is, maybe where we need to try and get Sorry, that was me unchairing. We've got one last question, but I'm conscious there's a couple of...
Tom Andrews, you've kind of touched on it and started to answer it, but I wouldn't mind seeing the other speakers talk about this as well. It's really interesting. One side is talking in a sense about revolution to change the system, and the other side is talking about adaptation and some fantastic adaptive work. Now, I work in an organisation that does similar stuff around CSAs and social justice and that sort of thing, but I do wonder sometimes whether I am legitimising the system that exists and in some ways perpetuating it. Mm-hmm. Now, I hope that I'm not, but I think that all ties in with, if you're driving towards a fundamental change in food culture and the food system, what is it that takes us to that place with all of those very, very powerful interests that sit between us and that eventuality?
I struggle with this every day, and I'm 28. I haven't been in the workforce for very long, but I am forced to accept the reality that so many of us are doing this work without realizing that we should be working ourselves out of a job, right? Just Food should not exist in 2013. We started in 1995, and almost 20 years later, we are still doing the same work. And right now, as we go through our own growing process, like Nourish Scotland, we're going through a strategic planning process. Right now, we are forced to realize that so many of the programs that we manage, right, because we do manage them day to day to day, would not work. They wouldn't function if it weren't for the 16 staff members who work at Just Food. That is a huge problem. We have this quote-unquote grassroots approach, but how many of the communities actually have the tools and the resources to implement these programs on their own? I don't know.
I kind of struggle with this, but perhaps a little bit less than most, because I don't worry about the fact that there isn't a single solution. It's a multiple leveled solution. You've got to work at all sorts of levels, and you don't have to worry too much about working at all of the levels. You do what you do where you are, and it's important. If you didn't, things would be terrible. We try to do what we do where we are, and if we didn't, things were probably a little bit worse, and so on. But I mean, one of the reasons that I was very keen to set up the foundation in the first place was for the 12 years before that, I was a professional political lobbyist. That's what I do, and I worked for the universities. I lobbied on behalf of all Scotland's universities, so it was basically the good guys. But I was, and I didn't say basically, but I was in watching how this works. And while a lot of the things that we are doing go on, the other side are intensely professional. They are in there all of the time influencing, not politicians, but civil servants and bureaucrats to outsource, to manage, to change, and so on and so on. We have to be doing this at all sorts of levels. And one of the messages, I've obviously been travelling, I think everybody has been travelling all around Scotland, talking at bunches of meetings and all over the place with the constitutional debate and so on. I think there's one message that I keep saying to people, and they keep looking at me for a second as if this is surprising. There is no such thing as political autopilot. You never, ever, ever get to a system where you press the button and that's it now running. Everything requires daily work from now until the rest of forever. And somebody was asking me, what's your strategy? It was Al Jazeera's doing a documentary and they interviewed me, and again they looked for a second a bit surprised. Says, what's your strategy for fixing Scotland? I says, I don't know, I was planning to get up in the morning, do the very best I can, go to bed and start again. And that is literally something that I have observed. Corporations do not stick their feet up in a chair and say, that's the job done. The job is never done. The job is never done so long as humans are still around making messes, good and bad. So we've just all got to do the best that we can. And the one thing that I have, the only frustration that I have, is that sometimes there is a sense that in some way the different approaches are in conflict. They're absolutely not. We have to work at every level, and it's not one giant coordinated run through. We're all working in different ways, and sometimes we do work against each other in different formats. And yes, there's an argument to say if we had people starving on the streets of Glasgow now, there would be action. So as somebody who's working mainly at high-level policy, do I want people starving in the streets of Glasgow to make my job easier? No, I definitely don't. So there isn't a simple answer, but don't get hung up on it. It's okay. Wake up in the morning, do the best you can, go to bed, start again.
Awfully tempted to think that there may not be a simple answer, but actually exposing large sporting estates to business rates might not be a bad start. I was just thinking of one example that I've been writing about, one which still just makes me so angry. It's two guys, I know some of you here know them, Ron Greer and Derek Pretzwell. Ron is like a mad man of Wonga these days because he's Robin, this is who you're going to become, right? If it all goes wrong. But Ron and Derek basically greened up part of the desert that exists on either side of the A9 as you rise up, beyond Pitlochry and Blair Athlone, whatever. You get up to that bit and it's just like a complete years, wilderness in the sense that there is nothing that grows. It's just a barren wasteland. And we have been, perhaps I'm particularly sensitive about this as somebody whose family was cleared in Caithness and has been long told that we inhabit simply a bog. But what they managed to do by they removed the sheep and deer overgrazing by, fencing. But what they then did was they started planting trees again through lupins, and this is where I came in because lupins are my favourite flower. Lupins against actually all the natural, I think SNH were a bit pissed off with them, but lupins and broom, because this returned nitrogen to the soil, raised the temperature at the soil level, gave shelter to the little trees. For 2 years, it looked like they'd made a big mistake. All there was lupins. Nice. But within 5 years, the ecology of it had changed, and they were using some trees like Norwegian maples, for example, these were better suited to the climate. And they ended up with, just an unbelievably beautiful, verdant woodland on a piece of land they don't own, so they can't do anything more with it. Two things out of that. The leaves that came from this broadleaf tree, when they fell into the loch beside it, finally created leaf litter for the wee bugs upon which fish feed. Now, these lochs are not productive in fish terms very often. This could be a major source of food for Scots. But we don't get to be even interested in this. It's taken me abusing my privilege as chair and your tolerance as hungry people to tell you this story. And there's a loch, you know how many there are. There's lochs all over the place beside communities which are estranged from their very existence because there is no chance to walk on them, professional qualifications. They had only changed a desert into greenery. They had only restocked a loch by not even touching the fish. They'd only done that, but they weren't they didn't have all the letters at the end of their name. Now, we can continue to accept this kind of situation and not even understand the knock-on effects of this estrangement from our own unbelievable natural resources. I don't see how we can actually get to a point of good food policy until we start to question who owns our natural resources. Not just the land, the lochs, the rivers, the moors, the whole blinking shebang. Sorry to have once again strayed into a heavily opinionated territory. I think we're possibly going to, because we are standing between yourselves and food, I'm imagining you're wilting and needing to get some. Yes, right. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention, your good questions, and particularly to our two thoughtful and thought-provoking dudes at the front. Would you please give a very warm round of applause to Robin